The environment within the army camp had grown notably cheerful due to their continuous victories. The heavy, oppressive air that usually clings to a theater of war had been replaced by the scent of roasting meat and the crackle of communal campfires. Soldiers from different countries were chatting among themselves, their voices rising in a harmonious hum that effectively allowed them to forget the tension that had previously existed. Among them, men who had once looked at each other with suspicion, separated by borders and old grudges, now sat shoulder to shoulder. They were chatting about what they would do after returning home, their eyes reflecting the flickering orange light of the flames as they shared their dreams. Some planned to marry the sweethearts they had left behind, while others wanted to start businesses with the spoils of war they managed to collect. Amidst the cheerful atmosphere, a knight of Briols, Preen, walked alone, observing the overall situation. His boots crunched softly on the dry earth as he moved through the rows of tents. He reflected that these days everyone was mixing together, a sight he hadn't expected to see so soon. On the first day, it felt like no one would even talk to each other. Back then, the camp had been a patchwork of isolated groups, each wary of the other's customs and capabilities. As he walked, a conversation caught his attention. He slowed his pace, his ears picking up the boisterous tones of a few infantrymen. A soldier asked his companion if he heard they were insanely popular in the Empire, his face flushed with excitement and his hands gesturing wildly. The other soldier questioned it, his voice skeptical as he asked if that was really true. He leaned back, crossing his arms, suggesting it was probably the popularity of His Highness Ragnar or the Prince of Briols, sounding unconvinced that the common foot soldier received any glory. The first soldier sighed, a look of envy crossing his features as he admitted he was truly jealous. Preen looked at a nearby flag of Briols, the fabric snapping softly in the evening breeze. He thought of Yuri, specifically how he had left a strong first impression on everyone. The image of the young prince's arrival, composed, royal, yet undeniably sharp, was burned into memory. Still, he was the one who achieved overwhelmingly many goals, created the current atmosphere, and made everyone fight together. It wasn't just royal blood, it was the way Yuri led from the front that had bridged the gap between the allied nations. Thinking all this, Preen reached the sparring ground and saw Yuri sparring with another knight of Briols, Hossein. The ring of steel on steel echoed through the camp, a rhythmic and lethal melody. Others gathered, surrounding them to watch their advanced display of power. The onlookers stood in hushed awe as the two warriors moved with a fluidity that blurred the line between combat and dance. Preen looked at Yuri and wondered how a prince could accomplish so much at such a young age. The sheer technical proficiency and the weight behind every strike were not things usually found in pampered royalty. At that moment, Hossein noticed Preen standing at the edge of the circle. He lowered his weapon slightly and asked when he had arrived. Yuri also noticed him, his breathing steady despite the exertion of the bout. Both stopped their match and walked toward Preen, their armor clinking with every step. Preen touched the back of his head, a gesture of awkwardness betraying his humbleness, and told Yuri he was just going to watch. As they finished, Yuri teased him with a playful glint in his eyes while wiping sweat from his brow. "Are you jealous?" Yuri asked him. He added that if he wanted to spar, he could tell his master, Myung-chan. Preen plainly denied the offer, knowing he was no match for Myung-chan. The very mention of the master's name was enough to make most knights rethink their confidence. With a smile, Preen proposed that Yuri visit Briols after the war ended. It was an invitation born of genuine respect. Hossein joined in, his voice booming with pride as he said he would love to show him the seas of Briols, speaking of vast blue horizons and the salt-heavy air of their homeland. Yuri replied with a smile, saying that when the war ends, he would visit Briols to raise a toast together. He looked at his comrades, his expression softening, and added that if they could defeat the orcs, they would surely do that. Suddenly, the warmth of the moment was shattered. A black flag rose in the watchtower, its dark silhouette flapping like a funeral shroud against the sky. The guards rang the huge bell, the clanging iron sending a jolt of adrenaline through every soul in the camp. The cheerfulness vanished instantly, replaced by the cold reality of combat. An orc army was attacking the camps in enormous numbers. Far off in the distance, the horizon was covered in dust from their march. It looked as if the earth itself was rising to swallow the sun. They rode giant lizards with eyes glowing red in the dust cloud, the beasts' low growls vibrating in the air. On the other side, the Alliance army prepared. The transition from peace to war was seamless. Soldiers grabbed their shields and formed ranks with practiced precision. They stood firm, ready to face the orcs as a wall of steel and grit. The supreme commander of the Alliance army, Ragnar, stood in a watchtower observing the situation. His gaze was fixed on the approaching storm, calculating the movements of the vast horde. Down on the field, Yuri sighed, the sound lost in the growing din of war. He remarked that there were so many he couldn't even see the horizon. The scale of the invasion was staggering, a sea of green skin and jagged iron. Roland came forward, his face grim as he adjusted his gauntlets. He said the news from the opposite side was the same, their whole camp was surrounded. They were not just facing a frontal assault, they were being boxed in by a relentless tide. Giving no attention to that, Yuri teased Jared, looking to break the mounting tension. He asked him if he was scared, noting he was awfully quiet. Jared made an annoyed face, his brow furrowing as he looked at the prince. He replied that he was not afraid. Yuri then said he had changed, looking at his friend with a knowing smirk, remarking that previously he would have said he didn't want to get involved in troublesome things. Jared sighed in frustration, his shoulders slumping briefly, and asked when he was ever like that. To ease the tension, Yuri stated with confidence that they had come this far. He looked at the men surrounding him, his voice steadying their hearts, and declared they would go even further, his words acting as a silent vow. At that moment, a giant figure emerged among the orcs. The atmosphere thickened, the air becoming heavy with malevolent pressure. The aura around him was different from any other orc, suffocating and ancient. He was tall and muscular, towering over his kin like a dark monument of war. Roland saw it and commented that it was insane. The presence of the creature was enough to make even veteran soldiers hesitate. Yuri instantly recognized it was Orca, the king of orcs. The sight of their king made the orcs more frenzied as they grasped for battle. They began to howl, beating weapons against shields in a deafening cacophony. The battle horns rang a deep, guttural sound signaling the beginning of the end. The commander, Ragnar, signaled the troops to move. Both armies charged. The ground trembled under the weight of thousands of feet and the thundering claws of giant lizards. It was the final showdown, the strongest orc army against the allied nation's force. Yuri led the charge, his sword drawn and gleaming. He shouted to motivate the soldiers, his voice carrying over the screams and the clashing metal. The soldiers also fought with great courage, their resolve strengthened by months of campaigning. They struck down the orcs one by one, their actions synchronized and deadly. Though the orcs were physically powerful and large, the soldiers' coordination was exceptional. They supported one another and fought with desperation, creating small pockets of resistance that the orcs could not easily shatter. Yuri moved through the chaos like a whirlwind, his blade appearing as a silver streak in the darkness. He commanded everyone to remain focused, his eyes scanning the battlefield to track the shifting lines, but suddenly a massive shadow fell over him. The light was extinguished as if an eclipse had happened during the fight. He looked up at the sky and was stunned to see the orcs' wyvern unit. The enormous, leathery-winged creatures soared above the slaughter, their screeches cutting through the air. The orcs flew over the battlefield armed with bows and arrows, their high position granting them a terrifying advantage. They pulled their bowstrings, and arrows began to fall from the sky like rain. The black shafts whistled through the atmosphere, thudding into shields and the earth. Seeing this, Yuri smiled with a dangerously cold expression, noting that if that was their game, the ground war would be lost unless the aerial threat was handled immediately. Yuri sheathed his sword with a sharp click, then drew the short daggers he had purchased earlier, his fingers tight around the hilts. He whispered to himself that it would consume a vast amount of mana, but he had to break their momentum. He began to channel his energy, charging a short dagger with his mana. It glowed with a thick green aura, the light so vibrant it seemed to pulse with a heartbeat. Yuri then controlled his short dagger, his mind guiding the weapon as it spun through the air. The blade moved with impossible speed, deflecting all the incoming arrows and creating a protective perimeter of sparking green light. He pulled out another dagger and hurled it toward the sky. The weapon streaked upward like a falling star in reverse. The projectile hit an orc riding a wyvern, the force of the mana-enhanced impact knocking the creature off its mount. Yuri seized the moment, his muscles coiling with explosive power. He mounted his horse, spurred it into a gallop, and then leaped into the sky. In a feat of incredible athleticism, he soared through the air toward the low-flying beast. He grabbed the leash of the injured orc's wyvern, his fingers digging into the rough leather. With a powerful heave, he pushed the orc off the wyvern and seized control. He sat firmly in the saddle, the wind whipping his hair as the wyvern let out a startled cry. He then looked at the other orcs riding wyverns, his eyes burning with fierce intensity. He asked them if they truly thought they could run wild in the sky. He felt the raw, primal power of the beast beneath him. He then brought out his short daggers once more, the green aura flaring to life again. He looked across the horizon at the remaining aerial unit and confidently declared that he would slam every single one of them into the ground.